What we're going to do today, we have some dynamic panelists. I don't know if you've listened to the different radio programs we've done. It's not every day that you get to be around people who are living legends. We have people here today that are going to present, and other people are going to be a part of the panel. What I encourage you to do is do what I've done over the last few weeks, is read their books, question them to death, and to learn from them. Because the panels we have today are just people you're not going to see every day. And you need to take advantage, because you have a financial question, certainly be sure and ask Jana Edwards. So we have three people on our panel. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to introduce Brother Shawn Rochester. Brother Rochester is an author of a sought-after, very well authored, sought-after speaker who's spoken on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, at several universities, at the United Nations, speaking about the staggering financial costs of discrimination against black people in America and the new economic framework to help create millions of jobs and businesses that are missing in the black community. Shawn has received citations from the New York State Assembly, New York City Council for his work, economic development, and was also selected in the International Human Rights Commission Relief Fund Trust to be listed in its 2019 Almanac as one of the top 100 human defenders for his efforts to educate people on the financial costs of discrimination, past and present, against members of the African diaspora in America. In addition to this, Shawn is also a seasoned corporate executive with extensive histories in strategic planning experience, and also as an executive over different financial projects in both Europe and the Asia Pacific region. He can tell you a lot more about who he is, but I highly suggest that you get a copy of his book signed before the end of the day. So rather than steal his thunder, I will ask you to please put your hands together for Brother Shawn Rochester.
My name is Shawn Rochester, and I've written a book called The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America. And in that book, I talk about the financial cost of discrimination against black people, past and present. Now, normally, when people talk about discrimination, we tend to speak about it from the perspective of the immorality or the injustice associated with it. But I wanted to look at it from the perspective of what does it cost? And more importantly, what does research from the finest institutions, universities in the country say that that cost is? Now, the book is broken into three parts. The first part of the book talks about the financial cost of discrimination in the modern day, in a present context. And I look at markets that are critical for wealth accumulation. So in housing, automotive, which is actually larger in terms of purchase price, then housing, the finance and insurance that underpin those things, the job search, high-end careers, online commerce, and capital raising for businesses. In the second part of the book, I do a look back from the time of slavery up until now. And I look at the economic implication of lots of different programs and practices that we may be very familiar with. In the third portion of the book, I do a summary of where we are right now, and I introduce an economic framework that I call PhD. And PhD stands for Purchase, Hire, and Deposit in ways that create jobs, create and expand businesses, and provide capital in the black community. Why is that of paramount importance? It is critical because today we're missing about 6 million jobs across the greater black community. We're also missing about 1.4 million businesses with employees or staff. You may be aware that there are 2.56 million black businesses. But what many people don't know is that only 4% of those businesses actually have any employees. It's roughly 109,000 companies. And that 4% generates about 70% of the revenues from black enterprise, almost $100 billion. And it employs about 1 million people. And we're missing 1.4 million of those. Those two things combined also feed into the amount of wealth that we are missing from our collective balance sheet, which is well over $8 trillion. These are huge issues. and huge challenges. And is typically the case when we're dealing with huge issues and challenges, we need to get a lot of people at the table, right? Much like we have in this room. Effective problem solving requires that. But it's very difficult to work on challenging and complex problems if A, people do not see the problem, or B, if they think you are the problem. If you would just fix you, we would be great. Now I'm going to share a few platitudes that I'm sure that we all have heard. One of those platitudes is that black folks are simply not trying hard enough. Kind of pause here and let this adjustment be made. So one of those platitudes is that black folks are simply not trying hard enough. That not trying hard enough has more to do with us not getting ahead than any form of racial discrimination, right? About 6 in 10 Americans believe that. Another platitude you may have heard is that black folks have the same chance or even a better chance than white folks to get ahead in America. About over 6 in 10 Americans believe that. Or you may have heard that black folks use racism as an excuse for failure. The failure is mine. And instead of me owning that failure, I spend all my time blaming everyone else. We're not the only people who struggled. We're not the only people who face discrimination, so on and so forth. You've got over 7 in 10 Americans that view that. Here is the challenge with that. Because if that is the background thinking and resonance, then that means that the programs and policies and solutions that are put in place is going to reflect that level of thinking. Now, effective problem solving requires a foundation based on 2 things. One is empathy and the other is understanding. Empathy is simply our ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes and to see things from their perspective and to understand the pathology of how they got there in the first place. Understanding is how we use data and information in a manner that can create a better environment for ourselves and for our fellow man. I want to share a quote with you from Albert Einstein that he gave to the National Urban League in 1946. And he said that we must make every effort to ensure that the past injustice, violence, and economic discrimination, which by definition is this black tax that I'm talking about, must be made known to the people. The taboo, let's not talk about it, must be broken. So, taking heed from Mr. Einstein, let's talk about it. And in a time that I have with you this morning, what I want to talk about specifically is how is it that after 400 years, more than 40 million African Americans own just 2% of US wealth. Either we are colossally and consistently inept, or there is something else going on in the environment that we need to take a deeper look at. So let's take a deeper look at it. Now this is what we're going to do. We're going to go back in our minds to the time of slavery. I won't talk about the details of that. There have been many books written on that. But I will look at things from an economic perspective. And then we'll walk forward to this point. Now, the first thing I need us all to understand about that time, or any time, is that slavery, by definition, is a 100% tax on your labor. Quite simply, it means that nothing that you produce is yours, not even you are yours. Now, under those conditions and at that time, there are many things that we could never value. We could never value what it means to be a man and to be unable to protect your family, or to enjoy the life and liberty and the freedom of invention. We could never price what it is for a woman to be unable to control her body over the entirety of her life. But there are some things that we can't price. And one of those things is the value of labor extracted from millions of people over a quarter of a millennia, almost 250 years. And economists have taken a look at that, and some of them place the number as high as 24 trillion. Others place it as high as $50 trillion. If you assume that the truth is somewhere in the middle, we can say that the value of the labor extracted from those millions of people over that time period is up to $50 trillion. Now, if that number is new and unfamiliar and large, that is not the only thing we can price from that time period. If you go to 1860, the other thing that we can price is the value of people held in bondage during that time. Why is that? Those people are the most liquid asset in the country. They are sold on open markets. There is a price if you are old or young, able-bodied or lame, male or female. And it turns out that the value of those people is so large that you have to measure it either in terms of total US wealth or total GDP, which is national income. So from a wealth standpoint, it's estimated to be between 16 and 20% of total US wealth. From a GDP standpoint, it's estimated to be between 1 to 2 years of national income. So if you look at it from a wealth standpoint, we're talking about 15.5 trillion. Now you might say, Shawn, how do you come up with 15.5 trillion? And I would say that national wealth is approximately $85 trillion. 16 to 20% of that is 14 to 17 trillion. If you take an average of the two, you're at 15.5 trillion. If you look at it from an income standpoint, it's approximately $28.5 trillion, today's equivalent. How do we come up with that number? National income is roughly 19 trillion. 1 to 2 years is between 19 and 38 trillion. If you take an average of that, you're at 28.5 trillion. That's two independent modes of valuing those people. There are other modes that I can go through. So if you take an average of those two, we're at $22 trillion is the value of those people in 1860 and today's equivalent. The point here is that no matter how you look at it, we're talking about massive and hard to conceive numbers. Now, if we fast forward a bit, let's talk a little bit about the economic implication of what I kind of just said, which is if we consider the fact that today the net worth of roughly 45 million black people in America is about $1.5 trillion. And we just said that the value of 4 million people in 1860 was 22 trillion in today's equivalent. That would imply that we meant 15 times more to the country as enslaved people than as free people today. That's just the math. So if you say slavery, we're talking about up to 50 trillion. Now you might say, I hear you. I know it was bad. I didn't know it was that bad. But truth be told, it was a long time ago, roughly 153 or so years ago. That's been a lot of time since then and now to be able to accumulate wealth. What continues to be the problem and the challenge? Here's the thing that we have to understand. Those people left bondage with no economic resources. We all heard about 40 acres and a mule, right? Not the Spike Lee joint, the actual. And the Homestead Act. And one of the things that I thought was always interesting is we know 40 acres and a mule never happened, right? But one of the things that I always thought was really interesting is to think about what would that have been worth in today's equivalent. So if you will indulge me, let's set the mule aside for the moment. The mule is very important. So 40 acres and a mule, and we're talking about 4 million people held in bondage, that's roughly 160 million acres. Now, I once looked at buying some land with a group of friends. It was about 400 acres. And to see 400 acres, you got to go up in a helicopter. 160 million acres is hard to conceive. right? Now, the price of an acre goes from roughly $3,020 to $6,350. Quick math puts the value of those acres at about $1 trillion on the high end, producing about $90 billion a year. Now, what I want us to understand is those prices that I have there, those are not Manhattan acres. These are farm acres that we're talking about, right? Now, so we know that that never happened. And $1 trillion of value does seem like a large number. But if you compare it to the 50 trillion that was extracted, it's 2%. Not even 2% of startup capital were they worthy of. Now, that didn't happen, but what did happen? What land was distributed? That goes back to the Homestead Act, which we might remember from like our junior high school or middle school days, right? Now, the Homestead Act, in 1862, Congress passed this thing called the Homestead Act, in which they would proceed to distribute 246 million acres to 1.5 million white families over the next 60 years. If you do the same math on a per acre basis, we're talking about the value of that distribution being about $1.6 trillion on the high end, or a little more than $1 million per family. Now, I am all about hard working and bootstrapping it, but $1 million, them a hella bootstraps. Now, how did it work? You had the opportunity to claim roughly 160 acres. And if you were so fortunate to be able to claim that 160 acres, and you stayed on it for 5 years, at the end of that period, you could take possession of that land. Now, here's the other thing that's worth considering. If you were an immigrant that came from Europe, literally with nothing but the shirt on your back, and people did come with nothing, and you were so fortunate to be able to claim one of these 160-acre parcels, at the end of that 5 years, did you not only receive or take possession of the land, but you also became a citizen. Because in those days, it took 5 years to naturalize, not the time that it takes now. So you could literally come here with nothing but the shirt on your back, and after 5 years have land that's of the equivalent of $1 million today, as well as US citizenship. Now, researchers say that when you think about the direct beneficiaries associated with this massive giveaway, it's up to 93 million white Americans. Direct beneficiaries, not secondary, tertiary, kind of, sort of, maybe, right? So when you think about land denied, 1 trillion, but then land distributed, 1.6 trillion, right? Now, if we fast forward to about, 1865, you think about the Civil War, the Southern economy is devastated, right? The global cotton market is devastated. The land confiscated in the South is returned to them because they seceded, all of their land was confiscated, right? And it was given back to them. You're in a position where what is needed is a massive, large, cheap, abundant labor force. Now, I fast forwarded past a bunch of stuff there, so I'm just going to double back and add a little more clarity to that. We all know that other than a natural disaster, the greatest trauma that we can bring to ourselves is warfare. So the Southern economy is devastated. What we may not sometimes know is that the global cotton market was the equivalent of the oil market today. Over 20 million people around the world are employed in that market in one way or another. About 1 million of those people lose their jobs upon emancipation in the Civil War. The US dominates 80% of that global market. You cannot beat free labor. And raw cotton picked in the South is 61% of US export, right? So the world is crying out because it affects India, it affects Egypt, it affects Japan, it affects Europe. The world is crying out, what is America going to do to put her newly freed people back to work? Because they were in what is known as a global cotton famine. And the answer to that is this thing called Jim Crow. And what exactly is Jim Crow? It is probably the least descriptive indicator of a thing that I've ever come across with. But what it is in a nutshell is that the Jim Crow system is a series of laws and customs reinforced with an extraordinary level of violence, designed to reimpose a 100% tax on the sharecropper's labor. Now, I know what you might be saying now. You might be saying, Shawn, up until this point, I was with you. The numbers, the data, it's tight, but you're talking about 100% tax. We all know that these folks were poor, but 100% sounds like you're being a little hyperbolic. And here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna let you decide whether or not it was 100%, right? So what is sharecropping and how did it work? Sharecropping is those large mega plantations post-Civil War were broken into smaller lots. Black families were allowed to settle on those lots. They agreed to plant cash crops, and in exchange for planting those crops, they could share in a portion of the crop, sharecropping, right? But here's the challenge. It's literally a contract. And the other thing we have to understand about that contract is that the terms and conditions are all set by the small white farmer. Now, because people left bondage with no economic resources, at the time, 1870, black people own about 0.17% of US wealth, effectively nothing. And we all know that the harvest doesn't come tomorrow. The harvest comes at the end of the season or at the end of the year. So between now and then, that white farmer has to provide you with food and clothes and shelter and the tools and fertilizer and the seed and every single thing you need to bring that crop to market at rates as high as 70% per year. So they effectively control your cost structure, your expenses. Here's the other thing that we need to understand, that when you take that crop to market, that white farmer is the market. He tells you what it's worth. Now, if a person controls your revenue or income, and they also control your expense structure, by definition, they control your profit. Now, if you are unfortunate, and he is worried about you going to someone else that might be more generous, what he will do is ensure that your expenses outweigh your revenue, and your profit will be negative, and he will roll that into what you owe him for the following year. And now you are in perpetual debt servitude. Now, I'm not a mind reader, but I know exactly what you're thinking right now. I can feel it. And what you're thinking is this: Shawn, that's a bad deal. And I agree with you, right? I'm not gonna take that deal. You like apples? How you like them apples? And I'm with you, but here is the problem. They got a law for that. And those laws are called vagrancy laws. And they state this, that if you cannot prove that you are a landowner, and you cannot prove that you are gainfully employed, they can charge you with a criminal offense and put you in a state or county jail. Now you might say, I didn't see that one coming, so I might sign that contract. But upon second thought, it's still a bad deal. I'm not gonna do the work. They got a law for that. And those are called contract enforcement laws, which says you sign that labor contract. And if you break that contract, they can charge you with a criminal offense or put you in a state or county jail. Now you might say this, you know what? Put me in jail. I'm gonna sit there, you feed me 3 square meals a day, and when you're done with this foolishness, you can let me out. But they got something for that. That's called convict leasing, which means that they will lease you back out to the same white farmer you did not want to work to, or a corporation. Now, if you take that deal, here's what I want you to understand. There is one aspect of convict leasing that you could argue is worse than slavery in this one respect, which is while a slave owner will kill you, and will beat you within an inch of your life. Slaves are expensive. And they would much rather have you around for another 10, 5 or 10 years to maximize the return on their investment. That's called an interest in your residual value. Under convict leasing, they have no such interest. They only care about you and your well-being, if you call it that, over the contract period, the 6, 8, 18 months period that you're with them. They care nothing about your life beyond that. And under those circumstances, mortality rates are approaching 50%. You're talking about a 1 in 2 chance of death. Now, while it is draconian, it is at the same time incredibly lucrative, because an entire person is expensive. But if you can just lease a portion of their life and not have to care about the rest of it, so lucrative that in 1914, 20% of the state of Alabama's revenue are coming from convict leasing alone. There are estimates that that number is much higher. Now, we often go through difficult periods as a country, and then you come out at the end of the other side, right? But this wasn't just like a bad 3 years or 5-year period. This period lasted for 75 years. From 1870 to 1945, and during that period of time, 4,000 black people that we know of, the number is certainly higher than that, were lynched during that period of time. That is publicly executed by your fellow American. It is the equivalent of 1 black person being executed per week for 75 years. Nobody's been prosecuted for that. 200 laws were attempted, and until a year ago, not one was passed in terms of anti-lynching. Under those conditions, you will get the hint. No one is coming to save you. Now, I think you see what I mean by 100% tax on your labor. There was a sharecropper in the Mississippi Delta who said, I've been working these deltas for 30 years, and every year I know I've been robbed. Well, what can I do? You speak up, you get cussed. You raise up, you get shot. And that ends that. So, since it is 100% tax on your labor, and slavery is a 100% tax on your labor, that means that that period was slavery by definition. That is why they call it slavery by another name. Now, if during the period of slavery, up to $50 trillion was extracted from millions of people, and that period was roughly 250 years, and this period lasted for 75 years, which is about a third of that period, you could argue that during this period of Jim Crow, 15 trillion were extracted from black people. So think about this. The white power structure lost 22 trillion upon emancipation in the Civil War, the value of those people held in bondage, which represented 50% of the wealth in the South. And then over the next 60 years, 75 years, they would proceed to claw back 15 trillion of that from the descendants of those people. How do you build wealth under those circumstances? Now you could say, truth be told, not everybody was under the Jim Crow period. You know, some people did get a chance to get an education, and education is a great equalizer. W.E.B. Du Bois went to Harvard during that time. He said Harvard was lucky to have him. I like that, brother. Right? But here's the thing. Post-emancipation, what was needed was massive, cheap, abundant labor. What was not needed was an educated class from the white farmers or planters' perspective. But newly freed people lobbied for and wanted expansion of public education for themselves and their children, as they should. Also, small white farmers wanted the same thing. for their children, as they should. The white planter class was not interested in that because of the labor force that they wanted and the fact that they educated their children in a private school system. But they needed the help of the smaller white farmers. So they agreed to the expansion of public education, but they would divert resources from black students to white students. Right? The diverting of those resources was extraordinarily significant. And they were very consistent with the belief system about what the power structure wanted. Here is a quote from Thomas Logan, who is a former Confederate general and industrialist. He said this: "When the freedman regards himself qualified to earn a support by mental work, intellectual horsepower, he is unwilling to accept manual labor." Du Bois says that in the 40 years since emancipation, Negro taxes and the Negro share of income from indirect taxes and endowment has fully repaid the investment in black people's education by white folks. That's how little was invested and how much was diverted. In 1914, there's a gentleman by the name of William H. Baldwin. He is the president of something called the General Education Board. Think of that as the Department of Education before the Department of Education. And he said this specifically: "The South needed Negroes educated so they could be the best possible laborers. With the right kind of education, Negroes will willingly work menial jobs and open up opportunities for Southern whites to perform the more expert labor." Under slavery, the expert labor, the crafts, the high intellectual labor, that was all done by people held in bondage. And they want to shift that post-slavery. The diversion is so significant that by 1917, there's only 64 public high schools for black kids in the South. Not in a county, not in a district, not in a state, not in a region, in the South. And then most of those were owned and built by black people. Of course, they were churches and appendages, right, to churches. If you look at New York City during the 1920s, New York is spending 50 times more per student, 50, than South Carolina is spending on its black children under their segregated system. So if you think about that, and you're an immigrant who comes to this country during that time, and you literally have nothing but the shirt on your back, which is true, you could be, and you stayed in that New York City area, 50 times more will be invested in the human capital development of your children versus a black child in the South whose family had been here for hundreds of years. In the South, for every dollar invested in a black student, 5 to 8 were invested to educate a white child. That is not rocket science. If we do that with our children, one will be a pauper and the other will go to Harvard. Teachers are receiving 25 to 30 cents on the dollar, black teachers, for what white teachers are receiving. Very difficult to accumulate wealth under these circumstances. And of course, white children are receiving 50% more years of education by the time that they are 25. Gary Becker, who is a professor of economics, he was professor of economics. He wrote a book called The Economics of Discrimination. He said in the past 50 years, Negroes have advanced little in occupational hierarchy. He wrote that in the 1950s, the first 50 years of the 20th century. No relative improvement at all between black people in their positions and their white counterparts. That's how effective the limited investment was. Researchers say that if they kept the other discrimination the same, but they had just invested equally in the children in the schools, that alone could have cut the wage gap by up to 50%. That alone. Now, if you think about this happening across millions of children, across a generation, we're talking about more than $600 billion in opportunity costs and loss. Over a 90-year period, multiple generations, we're talking about well over $3 trillion. Now you could say, you know, truth be told, back in the day you didn't need a super duper education. We all have a story about a grandfather, a great uncle who had like a third degree, third year education, but a hell of a work ethic, and bought land and a home and did some amazing things, right? So you didn't really need a super duper education back then. And that home ownership is a great wealth builder, which is true. And a country believes deeply in home ownership, right? And the greatest wealth building that's ever happened in the history of the world happened here in this country, largely due to home ownership. The country believes deeply in it, and the country invested according to its beliefs. Well over $20 billion were invested in terms of subsidies to help American citizens become homeowners. It's the equivalent of about $1 trillion today. It is a remarkable, outstanding, and very admirable thing. It created what's known as the property middle class. Here's the challenge. Less than 2% of all those economic resources went to black families. While at the same time, the more than 20 million European immigrants who came here were able to participate in those things after they naturalized, right? Now, I won't go into redlining in the FHA, which you guys are familiar with. Effectively, the government created the mortgage as we know it. They guaranteed the payments of the American system that allowed banks to take lower down payments, offer longer repayment terms, and to give modest kind of interest rates over that repayment term. The challenge is they did not provide that for black Americans, especially if you wanted to move into a white community. They were concerned with something called neighborhood stability. So if you bypassed the government and you went to your bank, the bank would not underwrite your loan. And if they did, they were concerned that the federal government would not underwrite them. If you went directly to the builder, they would say no and would not participate. And even if they did, they were concerned that their loans might not be guaranteed by the federal government. And if you went to the real estate agents, they generally extracted themselves from selling property to black people into white communities. If you went to your fellow American, very often those folks signed covenants in their communities that said if you sell, you promise to sell only to someone of European or kind of Caucasian descent. So you've got a real total wall preventing you from moving into economic opportunity. This exclusion is so significant that if you look from the period of 1930 to 1960, less than 1% of all mortgages in this country went to black people. The greatest wealth building tool known to man, and you are unable to participate. Now, if you can't get a mortgage, does that mean that you still don't want a house? No, we still want a house. So what do people do? They turn to the private markets under a construct called contract sales. And in a private market, they're not regulated. So appraisals aren't required. So people are selling houses at 2x the value and draconian interest rates. But let me tell you what's the worst part of it. Under a contract sale, as you make your installment payments, you earn no equity in the house. So let me be clear on this. Let's say we agree that I'm going to purchase the home from you, and I'm going to make 100 installment payments, right? And I make 99 on time, and I miss the 100th. You get to keep my 99 payments. You get to keep my down payment. You get to evict me and then resell the house to someone else, and I have no equity in that house. And while I'm in it, I'm responsible for all the operating costs. How do you accumulate wealth under those circumstances? Now, what they estimate is that in the 1950s, if you look at that greater Chicagoland area, which is a massive area for people, black people migrating from the South, it is estimated that 85% of all real estate transactions occurred under contract sales. How do you accumulate resources under those circumstances? Now you could say, you know what? While it is crazy, kind of hunker down in what they call the black urban ghetto. Ghetto means involuntary, right, by definition, and let things blow over. But here's the challenge if you decide to do that. At the time, rents are more than 50% higher in these ghettos than outside of it. Now, at first thought, that sounds very non-intuitive. But here's why that's the case. What happens when the demand for housing, because millions of people are leaving the South, is growing much faster than the available amount of housing? The price goes up because they cannot move into these other communities that they would otherwise want to. And if you're trying to hunker down and save, in 1968, the Federal Trade Commission did a study, and they found that products, goods and services in these black communities are 3 times higher than in communities outside of them. 300% higher. And if you say just kind of work hard, you'll blow over, there are estimates that workplace discrimination is about $1.6 trillion during that time. Mind you, that's in 1983 dollars. So if you adjust that to today's dollars, it's over $4 trillion. How does one accumulate wealth and resources under these circumstances? Now they did some studies, and they look at a period of time between 1943 and 1951. And what they found was that white Americans born during that time would go on to accumulate 11 times more wealth than black Americans born during that same time. Now, what we've been told is that's about hard work. It's about making decisions and the like. Some people not making good decisions. But it would appear from the data and the historical record that the environment that was created for certain people had much more to do with these outcomes than just hard work. So from housing, and I'm not gonna labor, it's well over $4 trillion apiece. I'm not gonna have time to go into the New Deal and the GI Bill. I won't have time to talk about the interstate highway development. The value is extraordinary, and lots of those highways were run through black communities. I won't have time to talk about the fascinating period of time from post-civil rights up into the present. All of this is covered in the book, by the way. Shameless plug, right? But I think it's worth talking a little bit about kind of where are we right now. And the black community is currently missing about $1.5 trillion in business and consumer revenue. $1 trillion of that is business revenue, and that's associated with the 1.4 million businesses gap that we are dealing with. $500 billion of that is associated with our consumer income, which is generally a function of us earning less than our white peers in almost every rung of the ladder. We're missing well over $8 trillion in collective wealth, which we talked about, and of course the 6 million jobs and the 1.4 million businesses with employees. But something I want to talk about is this number that kept coming up when I was doing the research. It kept coming up again and again and again. And it was this issue of 2%. And it seemed to me like it was like a rule or a paradigm of some sorts. In areas that are critical for wealth accumulation for black people, it seems like our participation rate hovers around 2%. So if you think about corporate supply chain spend, less than 2% of that goes to black enterprise. If you think about government supply chain spend at all levels, and notice I'm being very specific, black enterprise, I'm not talking about minority enterprises and those things. Less than 2% of that goes to black enterprise at all levels. If you think about the spend from black people, less than 2% of that goes to black enterprise, which means 98% is going to every other kind of business. Last time I checked, 98% was close to excellent, so we are very good at not doing business with us. And then if you look at high growth, high compensation occupations, almost across the board, universally, our participation rate is less than 2%. Look at the technology space and all of the work that they have done and are doing, 2% participation. Our deposits obviously are not in our financial institutions. Only $4 out of every $10,000 in the US banking system is in a black bank. Those banks don't have enough liquidity and capital to be able to provide the lending that's necessary for Black enterprise. If you look at the SBA lending, less than 2% of that goes to Black enterprise. The number's around 1.6%. All of this really has a large negative depressive impact on job creation and business expansion, right? It's not conducive for business growth. Now I want to share something with you. So I gave this talk at, or a similar talk at Google. And I remember in the discussion afterwards, people said, we have a much better idea of what it has cost, Black people in America from discrimination. But could you also talk about what it costs the country? And I thought that was a brilliant question, as you can imagine. But at the time, I didn't have the answer. And I said I would take a look at it, and I would come back. I said I would take a look at it, and then I would be able to speak on it. And I was fortunate enough to be invited back to speak at Google. The only person, to my knowledge, who's been invited to speak there twice in a year. Take that for whatever that's worth. And when I went back, I wanted to frame it in this way. What if Black Americans had been allowed to participate fully in the innovation system in this country? Why is that? Because the period that we have been talking about, from 1870s to roughly 1945, that Jim Crow period, it is also arguably the most important period within the Industrial Revolution. It's happening at the same time. During that period of time, 2.5 million patents are created. You have the invention of the telephone, the light bulb, motion pictures, airplanes, automobiles, the transistor, semiconductor technology, of which all tech space is based on. All that is happening at that time. Do you know how many patents are attributed to Black people out of that 2.5 million? 2%, my brother right here is on it. Now, if you say less than 2%, you are correct. The precise number is 726 out of 2.5 million. You are effectively not allowed to participate. Why is this of great importance? If we look at Professor Khartoum from Yale, he says patents can be thought of as proportional investments in productivity. A constant flow of new patents can generate a constant rate of economic growth. You go back and you look at the patent growth rate and flow, and you look at economic, and you see that this is true. Brookings Institute says the nation's unequal access to high-quality schooling deprives the innovation system of a large number of people who might otherwise make or commercialize important discoveries. Now, this is something that I want us all to know, and everyone who interfaces and intersects with us in any way, shape, or form, which is that talent and skill and capability follows a normal distribution. That means across race and ethnicity and religions and whatever, generally 70% of the people are in the middle. 15% are substantially above. I call that the ultra brilliant. We like to think we're all a part of that group, right? And 15% are significantly below. That's across the board. What I wanted to take a look at was what was the size of that Black ultra brilliant population during that period of time? And what were they doing? So if we look at the size of that population, we go to 1870, we're talking about 730,000 people. This is not the Black population. This is that top 15%. What are they doing? They are sharecropping. The technical term for that is misallocation of talent and skill. You go to 1900, you got 1.3 million of that people, the ultra brilliant. What are they doing? They are still sharecropping and tenant farming. You go to 1930, we're talking about 1.8 million people. 1936, you still have almost 4 million Black people in the fields. What are they doing? You go to 1950, it's almost 2.3 million people. In 1948, only 1.6% of Black Americans even have college degrees. We're not included. That brilliance was not included in the innovation system. If they had been, what would have been the impact on US wealth and income, national income? We would have seen over 280,000 additional patents, not 726. That would have led to an increase in national income of $2 trillion. McKinsey just did a study and said if they worked to close the wealth gap between black people and white people, it would generate $1.5 trillion of economic benefit for the country. It would increase GDP by that amount. If these people had been incorporated, over $9 trillion of wealth would have been added to the nation. There is a massive opportunity cost. Gary Becker, who wrote The Economic Discrimination, said that both the discriminator and those who are discriminated against pay a price for that act of discrimination. The price was clear and massive for black people, but the price has also been substantial for the country. Now, there's a researcher from Michigan State University that did an interesting study, and her question was, what would have happened to innovation and patent creation if white Americans had experienced a similar trauma that black Americans experienced during that period of time? And her estimates are that 40% of the patents would have never been created. That's 1 million patents. Which one of these things do we not need? The transistor, the car, the train, motion pictures, light bulbs, telephones, communications. It would have reduced national income by almost $8 trillion. It would have reduced national wealth today by $34 trillion. Now I want to end this portion of the discussion with 2 quotes. One of them is from Albert Einstein at the same address with the National Urban League in 1946, and he says, "The worst disease under which the society of our nation suffers is, in my opinion, the treatment of the Negro." And what I did during this discussion is we walked through what that was from an economic perspective, or a portion of it. And the other is a quote from Emperor Selassie, who in his address to the United Nations General Assembly in 1963 said this: "The basis for racial discrimination has been economic, and it is with economics that these evils can be overcome." So with that said, we can transition to talking about solutions, PhD economic framework, the fact that minority does not mean black, and to our panel. Thank you very much.
One of the panelists that I'm introducing is someone who I have the pleasure of meeting. She's actually a sister of one of the brothers in the lodge. Very detailed secret I found out. This sister's really deep. Her sister's name is Jana Woodhouse. I did her radio show the other day, and I read the book that she has. Truly amazing sister. She's a certified financial planner, registered securities broker, and tax consultant. She was ranked in the top 1% of fully licensed investment brokers in America, and is a formal financial strategy and solution and business person for over 2 decades. In 1983, she became the first woman to work on Wall Street as a full-service broker, and after a successful 14-year career in trading, she retired to pursue her own entrepreneurial. Be sure to ask the sister the question of how do you increase wealth. So without anything, please do the sister a round of applause. And I don't have any information on the last grand person. It's Brother Ralph Baker. Is Brother Baker here? Please come right on the phone. Brother Baker also is an author, and he's the author of The Stock Exchange of How Inner City Kids from Brooklyn Predicted the Great Recession and the Pain Ahead in 2012. He explains in his book, The Stock Market Economy, through the eyes of the New York State Stock Exchange. It's considered one of the most important books on economics since the Great Depression, and must read by African Americans. Please give a round of applause to the day.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
I am really honored to be here. My passion continuously is to bring financial literacy to the urban community. And that's to basically to break it down, yeah, it's black folks. You know, Brother Shawn, I commend you. I received the book from my brother Kevin a year ago, and I couldn't put it down, and I kept talking about you. Because we all need to get the book and read it, and not only read it, but internalize it. And we need to get angry. We need to get emotional a little bit, and then come out of that, and then get active. And the bigger thing is that we know all this has been done to us, but we also know that we have a lot of money that goes through our community, and we don't get a taste of it. You know, we just let it give it away. No relationship to our money. And so let's make that change, and the way that we're going to make the change is, I have taken on a serious mission with a lot of my associates who happen to be here, to change the financial literacy in our community, because we have to be financially literate. We have to know where our money is going, how we're spending it, how we're utilizing it, and not spending it, but really circulating it in our community. So I have gotten behind the book that says the How Money Works book, Stop Being a Sucker, because the whole United States has been basically a sucker when it comes down to money in banks. And so the more we know, I know the mantra is that if we know better, we'll do better. And so that's my focus, is to bring that literacy to you. And then once that's done, then we can group together and take our funds, and we don't have to ask anymore, we can demand.
Hi, my name is Ralph Baker. I'm author of a book called Shock Exchange, How Inner City Kids from Brooklyn Predicted the Great Recession and the Pain Ahead. My background is economics and finance. I got my BA in economics from a school called Hampton City College, and my MBA from the Darden Business School at the University of Virginia. Spent about 15 years doing corporate finance and M&A. My interest in the stock market started when I was in the 5th grade, when my father taught me how to read the Wall Street Journal. It was one of several chores I had to do. And one of the chores was to learn about the stock markets. I would have to, my friends and I would have to play basketball at 5:30, the news would come on. And I had to stop playing basketball. It was the largest stock in the neighborhood. I had to go watch the stock report. And have something coach to tell my daddy when he got home. Mm-hmm. And so I would try to find the stock market. We call it Dow Industrial Average was going up, which means that stock market was going up, with the Dow Transportation Index was going up, which means there was inflation, which was not good. And he just keep asking me why, and he just threw this Wall Street Journal at me and made me read it. And so when I had my own son, I figured it was time to torture him. So when he was in the 5th grade, I started, but instead of just throwing it at him, I started a travel basketball team. It's called the New York Stock Exchange. And to be part of a team and learn about the stock market. So it was sort of a carrot and stick concept. My son told me it was the dumbest thing he ever heard. If I didn't change it, he was going to quit. So, we kind of grew together. And I knew if I documented what the kids were doing, something interesting would come out of it. And so we would have investment meetings in the summertime in between games. Sometimes we'd be in a park after a basketball game where we'd talk about stocks the kids to pick. And I was working in corporate finance for years, and some of the parents started picking on the kids, because I was expert in picking stocks and so on and so forth. And what ended up happening was that the stocks the kids picked outperformed mine. And what I learned was that kids should be better investors than adults, because they're always on to the next wave, they're always on to the next trend, they always try something new. So they're kind of like their own little focus group. So we played basketball tournaments in Harlem. We had a tournament called Shock Exchange come to Harlem. And we became known for, we really started to become competitive in the basketball court, but we really became known for studying about the economy and the stock market. And after we kept meeting over and over again, we started finding out that the vital signs of the economy were really poor. And I used to blog about the teams and the games and the stock picks. Then I started blogging about the economy because nobody else was talking about it. That's how a lot of blogs get started. When you know something somebody else doesn't, and you get frustrated because nobody's talking about it, so I started blogging about it. And I started realizing that people were repeating what we were saying, so I stopped blogging about it and put it into a book. And so the book basically chronicles a lot of what what we learned about the stock market and the economy over the years. And we were blogging about the Great Recession before it happened. So the mainstream media, so when we talk about the black tax, the mainstream media would tell you nobody predicted the Great Recession. We've been blogging about it for years. What they really mean is nobody white predicted it. That's what they really mean. And so we start talking about the black tax. This is the most important book on economics since the Great Depression, and arguably the most plagiarized book in the country. So he's talking about patents and copyrights. I represent a black agency where I wrote the book and published it myself. So I own my own publishing. And so you hear about a lot of publishing rights now. You hear about Mace and Khalid talking about their publishing deals. But I own my own publishing. And so that's why the mainstream media will not tell you about it. It's been reviewed by Library Journal, a couple other reputable book critics, but that's why the mainstream media won't tell you about it, because only black people are making money from it. And so they're trying to figure out how they can take my publishing and take it to a big white publishing house and let them commodify it. But that's sort of my story and the concept of the book. And so the stuff the kids were doing was practically amazing. You talk about fifth graders and sixth graders and seventh graders. We tracked them through high school. On the weekends, we're playing basketball in the summertime instead of learning about the stock market. They're going to visit Apple stores. They pick Apple and GameStop. We're going to visit Apple stores. We're interviewing employees at Apple, interviewing employees at GameStop, and all the investment picks about what new products they were coming out with, and so on and so forth. And it was kind of groundbreaking stuff. And we talk about financial literacy. We didn't necessarily focus on like opening a checking account. We focused mostly on investing and the fundamentals of investing. And they probably taught me more than I taught them. But so it's all chronicled in the book.
We're going to take full advantage of this panel. I'm sorry.
I guess
First of all,
you were excellent, bro.
Wow.
Thank you.
I read both the Black Tax and Jana. I think I got like, let's say, 20 pages to finish your book. So I got like 100 questions, so I'm not going to steal your time. My first question is to each one of the panelists. I read Jana's book, I read the Black Tax. Discussed some of it with my daughter, but if I was a parent, what is the best way for a parent, with the knowledge that you have, to improve your child's finances from this moment on? What would you advise a parent to do to help their kids to not fall into the trap that the average American, and especially Black American, is falling into?
Okay. I think that we do have to spend a lot of time with our children, giving them some of the basics. And, the other communities, they start talking at the dinner table about how money works. When we have our little ones and they want something, I have learned by having clients come into my office, and I have them bring their children when I do a financial strategy. But I had a situation that occurred when I had a little 8-year-old sitting with me, and he sat down, he was very good, he listened to all the things that we had to talk about, and his mother left the room for a minute, and I said, "So what'd you get out of this?" He said, "I don't get it." And I said, "What?" I thought I'd done a great job. So he said, "I don't understand why we have to do this, because when I get 18, I'm going to get the money card, and then I'll get a chance to go to the bank and I'll get my money." And so I was like, "Money card, okay." So when his mother came back in, I said, "He's talking about a money card." And so he looked at her and said, "Yeah, the money card. When you say we need some money, I gotta take this card and go to the bank and I get some money. ATM card." We gotta watch how we talk around our children.
Right.
Because he only equated the fact that you get a card when you turn 18 and you can go to the bank and you get money out. He has not equated it to the fact that mommy has to go to work and the money is deposited into the account. See, we as a people have to learn one thing that we have really lost. We've lost a relationship with our money. That's why we give it away so easily. When you have a relationship with something, you don't give it away. So what I think for our children, we need to sit down and talk to them. You know, we give allowances. I was shocked when allowances had increased to $20. I was like, wait a minute. I remember 50 cents used to be a good deal, you know. But if you're giving an allowance, you have to start to teach them some of the basics, which is a portion of it they get to use, because that's what we need to do, you know. But then also, you have to save a little bit. You have to put it away and how you're paying it. Another thing is that we have to become financially literate. You know, we have to not be shy about the market. We are in the market whether we want to be in it or not. We are the market. And so we have to put ourselves in a position where we teach our children. You know, I have clients of mine, they love to go to Disney and Disney World. And I'm like, yeah, but how much stock do you own in it? You know, we went this year, or last year, we were Wakanda forever, right? How much of Marvel and Disney did we own? You know, we gotta realize, just like what the brother just said here, the children are aware. But the thing is that we've got to teach them that you have to also have an economical hand in what that company is doing. Be it where you buy, you know, many would say, well, I don't have a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot. It's called drip. You take a little bit at a time and you drip it against a share. These are the things that I teach, but you've got to teach yourself so you can teach your children. So to get started, you know, we all started with, it used to be the little piggy bank. Okay, from the piggy bank, then there used to be where you could put money in the bank and have a little account. I still have my first savings account when I was in kindergarten. So yes, we used to have that. We don't have that anymore. So you become the bank. You hold the money for them. You work with them and teach with them. And if you don't, then you call me. Okay, because we have enough people on staff to help and work with them. So that's what my recommendation is, to help our children. And for our teenagers, those of them who know, you know, this is the new thing coming, start to listen to them. But when you do, don't just go and buy stuff from these companies. Invest in that company. Invest in it and make some money off of it. I have right now a 12-year-old who we're really doing an experiment on, because his grandmother didn't want to buy him all these name brands. And so he's being teased and he's being bullied. So we decided that instead, let's get a book. We're going to get a note. We got the book, and now we've got with him stock in all of these Nikes and stuff that's out here, all these companies. And so I said, just teach him, when they start teasing him about not having the top of the line, open up the book, look at the copy of the stock and say, what did you just buy? Oh, thank you, buy some more. That's right. You know, he went into Target. I got the story recently. He went into Target and he was able to pick up stuff from the floor in Target. And his grandmother was like, why are you doing that? He said, it's my store. You see, that's a difference, because he's owning shares in it. Now, ultimately, my goal is that he start to invest in businesses of people that look like us. But first, I got to start by baby step. And so that's where I'm heading, is that I want to educate our young. But while I'm educating the young, I got to also educate you guys, because we're basically got a whole country full of financially illiterate folks.
Yeah.
I would say financial literacy is like anything else. It's, I look at it more as a life skill. So if you put your child in a swimming pool when he's or she's a baby, they start swimming like fish and they aren't intimidated by it. If you introduce an adult to the stocks, they're not being intimidated by it. But if you introduce it to kids when they're young, they grow up with it. So I kind of grew up with the stock market. I remember as a kid, I remember dreaming like if I could just own IBM, like in the 70s. I just remember looking at all these symbols and stuff and watching the stock report every day. So it's not something I was daunted by. And it's funny because as I graduated, after I was leaving business school, I went to work on Wall Street. And I ended up working at a couple corporations doing mergers and acquisitions. And I'm like, wow, I'm really doing it, you know. And when I went back and wrote the book, I hadn't thought about this stuff for years. And what I realized was that my father had inculcated that with me. when I was, 9 or 10 years old. So he'd already planted the seed when I was a child. So it was never my idea. He had put the idea there. So you're not intimidated by stocks or Wall Street or investing if you grew up with it. You're not intimidated by swimming if you grew up with a swimming pool. And he also taught me how to work on houses and work on cars and what have you. I was kind of resistant to it, but it's more of a life skill so that you don't have to get taken. If you don't know anything about a house and you call a contractor, it's going to rob you while you're watching. If you don't know anything about cars, the mechanic's going to rob you while you're watching them. If you don't know anything about stocks, a stockbroker will rob you while you're watching them. So you have to be aware of it, and you should start kids off when they're young. The other thing, as far as blacks and economics, I think we have to look to the past. I grew up in a small town called Farmville, Virginia. The county's called Prince Edward County. Not well known. It's one of the 5 lawsuits that was part of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. It was the only decision, the only lawsuit that was led by high school students. They walked out of the school system in the 1950s. And it was the only school system that was not integrated. So the governor who had ruled Virginia politics, Harry Byrd, for 40 years, gave the kids an option to take this new segregated school or no school at all. They said, we'll wait for the integrated school. Because they knew there would be second-class citizens in that segregated school. He just closed the school system. And so my parents and my aunts and uncles and my older cousins had no place to go to school. So if you sometimes the parents, they could afford to send you to other parts of the country to go to school, or you just missed out on school. So I had cousins who started college at 21 years old. It's not very well known. But eventually, that's like 5 years when we reopened schools, the governor resigned from office. He had ruled Virginia politics for 40 years. And he died 1 year later. So I said they broke the birth machine. And they ended slavery in the state of Virginia, my parents and their classmates. And it's not well known. That's the spirit for which I speak from, and that's the spirit from which I walk and talk with. And I speak with absolutism in my voice. But that's the spirit which, when I wrote my book, I published it myself. I own my own publishing. And I started teaching young black kids in the community about investing. Anybody else who wanted to come along, that's the spirit of which I speak and talk with. So I grew up at an interesting time where I didn't grow up doing segregation, but my parents and my relatives, they all supported the black businesses that served them during segregation. So all I know was supporting black businesses. That's all I've ever known. I thought the town was still segregated when I was growing up. I thought the country was black. That's what I thought. Teacher told me in the 6th grade that blacks were minorities. I told her she was a liar. And I started to tell my mom. When I found out it was true, I went home and started crying. I couldn't believe it, that the country wasn't all black. And so that's the spirit which I walk and talk with. And you look back, we have to look to the past, not the present. These blacks coming out of Reconstruction, they had own their own businesses.
Yes, sir.
They owned their own institutions, and they represented black agency. The town where I grew up, there was a congressman named John Randolph who was Thomas Jefferson's cousin, who didn't believe in slavery, and so he freed his slaves. He wrote his will to free slaves. When he died, his wife contested it. But it lasted for like 10 years, contested the will for like 10 years. The will was finally recognized, and he had slaves who went to Ohio, land in Ohio, and land in Prince Edward County, Virginia, where I'm from. The slaves who went to Ohio were kicked off their land, but the slaves who went to Virginia, they built homes and businesses, and they lived as free blacks decades before slavery ended. Decades. So that's why when I talk about the kids resisted the school system, the segregated school system, it was this free thinking that permeated the county decades before slavery ended. And these blacks coming out of during Reconstruction were darn near geniuses. They ran their own towns, they ran their own businesses, they had their own homes, they had their own institutions. That's the spirit we need to get back to. We need to have develop a black ecosystem. You cannot keep going, taking your money and taking it to that community and hoping it's going to work out for you. The money's never coming back to you. It's not coming back. That's what's wrong with our community. I was talking about this in college, so I don't want to keep talking about it because if just talking about it solve the problem, it would have been solved already. And this concept, we need a black ecosystem for one, and we're not doing business with each other. It's not gonna work. So we can talk to the blue in the face about financial literacy. If you walk past nine black restaurants, get to a white restaurant, it's just not gonna work over the long term. And we need to inculcate that with our kids. Because I see it even among educated blacks in New York City. I call myself dating now. And I'm doing something. The women are dating, I'm just getting kicked in the head. But the young women I've gone with, they always want to kind of be in charge and take on this masculine role. They always want to recommend restaurants and this place. They always recommend black restaurants, black businesses to go to. They always taking that money to, I'm looking like, you gotta be kidding me. So you gotta go to inculcate the kids with this concept of this black ecosystem, black folks doing business with other African Americans, and this concept that we don't put value on anything, to the dominant culture puts value on something, it's hurting our community because by the time the dominant society puts value on something, they already own it. And so forth, whether it's communities or art or music or business or what have you, we need to put value on our own stuff. We need to get back, look to the past, to those blacks coming out of Reconstruction who own their own towns and own their own businesses. It's just not going to work. Just talking about financial literacy, talking about owning stocks, our community's going to keep going down over time.
It's a very big question that we could have a whole section on. There's the issue of what do you do as an individual? The first thing is you can't pour out that which is not already in you. So if you don't know how to manage your resources, how are you going to teach anybody else how to do it? So the first thing is to look for and find the information and the people that will help mentor you through it. That's very difficult, and I understand that, because most of the literature is meant for people who already have resources. So the information that's out there solves what I call an allocation problem, which is you already have resources, $750,000. Let me walk with you and help you figure out how to allocate that across various asset classes so you can get to intergenerational wealth. That generally is not our problem. Our problem is an accumulation problem. How do we go from where we are to actually accumulate those types of resources? And how do we do that with all of the massive noise and distraction that we're hearing in a hyper-consumption society that is fueled by debt, right? It requires a paradigm shift. And there's a second book that I have that really deals with this whole thing. It's a principle that I call SOUL, which is stewardship, ownership, and legacy, right? It's called SOUL, stewardship, ownership, and legacy. Stewardship is how do I manage my limited resources to their highest and best use to drive cash flow? No cash flow, we're done. Stop the conversation. There's no home, there's no college, there's no investing in a business, there's no any of that, right? And to understand where your cash flow levels are, you have to understand what your spending is, right? And that sounds like it's an easy task to do, but it's actually very, very involved and engaged in coming up with that. Then we have to focus on this notion that I call of ownership, right? Because ownership is just basically making sure that you're the only one who has claims to your assets. So that requires two things. You have to have a plan that's going to, over time, get yourself out of debt, right? And help us to be able to work hard to stay out of debt, which is very, very difficult in a debt-driven, society. And then the other piece of it is to have some understanding of legacy, which I define in 3 parts, which is we all know the proverb that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. When you think deeply about that, that is a mind-boggling focus. It's hard to have enough to cover yourself, but where we are supposed to be is we're supposed to actually be providing for the children that aren't even here yet, our grandchildren. So you gotta have enough for yourself and your children and them coming, right? And then it's how do you precisely do that given where we are? Given the fact that you will never get credit for pushing a Civic that you own. But a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz 500, whatever it is, that's $100-something,000, that none of us know whether or not that person can afford it or not, you will get credit all day long. That's sending a powerful message to people. And they have to decide that they don't want that stimulus and that they're going to make another choice so that they will have resources. It requires a paradigm shift. You first have to inculcate yourself, which is a great word, with that information. Then we have to be able to transmit it to our children. The other thing is we need to institutionalize this information. It needs to be in the curriculum. It needs to be taught in the churches, and it needs to be taught in these bazillion different organizations that we have that don't focus one iota at a time on economic advancement, right, in the Black community. Now, in terms of what we do with our kids, it's the same process. It's part of what we do every single day. What is it that you want, and why is it that you want it? Like, our kids are aware of assets and depreciating assets. And I said, well, I want this. I was like, oh, so you want a depreciating asset? Because we've had those conversations. They know what it is. I've seen what was it? It was a Bentley, but it was an old Bentley, right? But you can't tell that it's old as long as it's well maintained. And it was like 50 grand, which was affordable. It's not that, right? But I used that as a lesson to say, do you like this car? You think it's awesome? They were like, yeah, it looks great, blah, 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 blah. I said, okay. The starting price was $350,000. The price it's at now is $50,000, right? So you invest $350,000 in it, and you end up with $50,000. Is that the direction we're supposed to be going in? No, Daddy, that's not the direction we're supposed to be going. What direction should we be going in? We should be starting with the $50,000 and trying to get to the $350,000, right? It's helping them to think through this stuff and relating everything to money and finances. We talk about entrepreneurship all the time. What does that require? You need to earn a lot early and fast, right? And when if they're like having a tough time with their colleagues at school, I would say, do you want to work for that person? Like, no way, Daddy, but you better get on top of those books, right? Whatever is the motivation to get there. We are overrepresented in terms of college graduates in incomes that pay low wages. You could make a decision that can add or remove $4 to $6 million of lifetime earnings from your context. That is going to set the narrative of your life. Who's having these conversations? We got 436,000 young people that are graduating on an annual basis from associates to PhD. Almost certain the vast majority of those young people, because this information is missing, are going to make $1 million mistake. Why is that? Because they're figuring it out as they go. They don't know it. And we all know around 35 we come to Jesus. You want to go back to church, you want to listen, you want to start saving, maybe you want to get in a serious relationship, maybe you want to get married. But in those 14 years, you can run the math on your office as easy as mine. It's $1 million opportunity cost. Were you maxing out in your tax-deferred savings plan, 401ks? Probably not. Were you clubbing, buying up the bar, spending clothes on stuff that you didn't need? Probably not. Were you vacationing? Were you doing all those things? With families that have much larger wealth, 200 times more wealth than you do? These are all things that we need to protect our kids from. My strategy is, very simply, what are the things you need to avoid that cause the most damage, and avoid those things at all cost. You want to go to university, and you want university covered, no debt. They pay for brain and they pay for brawn. Develop both, get paid for something, right? You should be coming out of that institution with no debt. There's many things you can do to arrive at that, and that saves you, that could save you $250,000.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So like these are the conversations that we have, but parents may not know. Our household is very blessed. We're not special, we just are very, very fortunate. But there's many other people who don't have those blessings. Their kids are smart, are hungry, but they don't know other successful people to be able to put them under their tutelage.
Hold on one point. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Oh, I'm going to go to Sister Marcia. If you have a question, raise your hand and bring your mic.
My name is Marcia Booker, and I'm the first Black owner of an outreaching program in New York State. Now, my question is, I'm now getting equity from this company at up to about $200,000 a year, and want to know how I can pay the least amount of
I know this is personal, so, you know, I'd love to talk to you offline, but online. It all is in how you've got your business registered. And, huh?
LLC.
Okay, I'm gonna do what I normally have to say is LLC what?
Right.
Because the IRS doesn't understand an LLC. You either are a single owner, proprietor, or you are a partnership, or you're an S corp, or you're a corporation. And see, that's what happens in information. I hear it all the time. People say, I'm an LLC, and I'm like, okay, let me tell you what IRS is gonna say. How are you taxed? Because they don't have an LLC box. So, sole member?
Partnership, too.
Partnership, okay, so that's a K-1 situation. And so in that, there are ways by which you can have a business trust attached to your LLC. And the majority of your funds and your profits can go into that trust as opposed to you personally. And so you can cut down, whereas your personal, your partnership can take on as little as 1% each, and the 98% can go into the trust, which will be paying less taxes, which can be converted over, and anything else. I'm sure you all have heard about foundations.
Yes, sir.
So you attach the foundation to the trust, and you revert to paying no tax. So we can talk.
Yes.
Okay, there are ways, when we're building, we haven't been taught how to be in business in this capitalistic society. We have been taught to be worker bees. And so to change that, all the mechanisms that are out here today, and especially the new tax laws that are out here, they are for us, but we have to be in business. And we don't need to be in business just to say we're in business, you know, and I'm gonna have a loss. No, you're in business to make profit. Just like you said, you got equity, you got money. Now how do we change this? You know, that's another thing is that I teach for the children answer is that we pay our children, we give our children allowances. Yeah, they don't give allowances, the children work. And then they put that money into a portion of it, goes in the child's pocket, and the other portion goes into maybe their Roth IRA, you know, because we got also a misnomer of things of how our money needs to be invested.
Yeah.
We pay money, okay, let's say, put it this way, best way I can explain it is, if we were all farmers, and we had the opportunity to pay taxes on our seed or on our harvest, which one would we pay? On the seed. Why? Because it's less, right? So why in the world do we go in and put our money into 401k plans where we're paying less money and then you gotta pay taxes on the harvest? Why don't we go and invest in things like the living benefit or life insurance where people take it, and grant you, when I first got on Wall Street, life insurance was not a topic, but the life insurance agent comes into our homes in our community and teach us about some term insurance where we can take things and invest it and grow on a different level. I still say financial literacy is imperative. We can't teach our children anything if we don't know it. But more than that is that when we know it, we've got to give it back to our children. There's only 17 states in this United States that teach, make it mandatory for financial literacy to be taught at the high school level. And New York isn't one of them. Okay, so therefore, it's by plan. So yes, let's talk to our little children. Let's talk at the table. You know, I had the greatness of going through in high school. We did a mock Wall Street. But even more is that turn that around and yes, invest. I say that until we can get to crawl, we're not even crawling. We can't walk. You know, we say we want a business, then we have to be in business. We have to show where we're going to make our profit, have our business plans. And then we can group together as a whole and start to invest in ourselves. But tax-wise, yeah, we here in the United States, we got to pay tax. Okay, so how do we pay less? And so you've got to trust some of the people who look like you, who understand, and not to get over.
If you have a child, okay,
who wants to invest in company X. Okay, how would you tell him or her how to research and what to research, and how would you validate that the data or the information?
If they want to invest in what was it that
If they want to invest in company X, whatever that is.
Oh, whatever the company is.
Yeah, but whatever the company is, they want to buy the stock or they want to buy the shares.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, if they want to do that, then what you need to do is, first of all, you got to introduce them to something that they use all along, the internet. Okay? Then you get ready to see, is that company publicly traded? Because some companies are not publicly traded, they're private companies. But if that company X is publicly traded, now you've got to pull up the financials. This is where it becomes important to look at a stock. How do we read a stock? How do we look at it and analyze a stock? So you take it step by step. It's kind of simple. Now, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. The Wall Street Journal is at a 12th grade reading level, so it's not neuroscientist stuff, okay? So it's simple to look at a company, see what they've done, what their profits have been doing through the years. Reading what their plans are, how well they've done. And then there's certain things called profit and earnings statements, and to see how well have they been doing. And then at that point, you can buy a little bit of it and start to track it. That's what I would do with a child, you know.
What's the look back period?
Huh?
What's the look back period?
I would always look back anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And if the company has not been in existence that long, then just take a look and see where they're going. You know, because sometimes you can't. And watch out for fads. I might as well, since I got the mic, I can say it. Bitcoin, you know, watch out for the fads. Okay? Understand what's going on. You know, everybody in God's land, when they come to me, they say they want to be invested in marijuana stock. And I'm like, okay. There's things called penny stocks that are on the market that don't have really a full value. They don't even have a market. You know, a market, think about what a market is. A market is someone wants to buy and someone wants to sell. You know, if nobody wants to buy or nobody wants to sell it, then therefore there's no market. So you have to watch these things. And so, you know, when the Bitcoins came about, it was very, you know, everybody was all excited, but it was like 5 years too late. Because those of us who were in it had already gotten in, and we needed a market to be created so we could get out. You know, this is just knowledge. But before you start the investing, start with the little stuff, putting away, building. Let that child see that, okay, I saved $10. I have a little game that I have that people can do by saving $1 for every day in the week. And at the end of the year, you've got $1,372 at the end. Hey, make it a family little project. Or do something where you have, hoard your fives. Every day, get your kids involved with, and they'll love to come to you and say, Mom, Dad, you got five? You know, to hoard them, put them to the side. Show them that they can save. What is it about? We have got to get into another mindset. We've got to get into a wealth principle mindset. And so, yes, investing is necessary. If they like something, you know, they make them look at it, you know, look at how that company is done, to answer your question, because I know I can go off on things. But the bigger thing is to get them in the mindset that they can build and that they're building for something. You know, don't just give them something, let them work. If you want those $300 sneakers, okay, I got 150 towards it. You show me how you're going to get the other 150 legally. How are you going to do it? You know, you're going to work for it, you're going to do it. But not only to buy, but don't take it all. Take it so that you can invest it and build on it. You know, because the banks, if you look, once you get this book is in your hands, is the rule of 72. The rule of 72 says that you put your money into an investment and divide it by that interest rate, and it will tell you how frequently your money will double.
My God.
So if you take 1% from the bank, and then you divide it into 72, It'll be 72 years before that money doubles. So you put $1 today, it's worth $2 in 72 years. Good luck. Okay, but the banks ain't even offering you that. They're doing 0.09. I'll give you that mathematically. That's with 800 years. Okay? We can't invest our money in the banking system and think that we're going to become rich. It's not going to happen. We have to learn how to make that money grow faster. And then we can take it and open up our businesses and get ourselves straight. But if you've got profits going on into your business, you gotta see if you want to take it public. If you want to move it to that level. If you don't, then let's talk about how we can save on taxes.
Yeah, when the kids were in New York Stock Exchange, we basically started with the kids and told them to invest in what they know. And they picked stocks like Nike, GameStop, and Apple. And we narrowed the list down to Apple and GameStop based on like price earnings ratio, where they were trading. And so we just basically had them invest in what they know, and we just tracked it over a couple of years. If you have little kids, have them invest in start with what they know first. Because a lot of times the products that they use or stuff that they're using is probably some things you may not use yourself, but maybe the next growth company, the next growth industry.
So just a couple of quick things. Investing in individual stocks is a very risky business. So you may want to try some simulations with them as they're kind of going through that. It's very easy to start off with a diversified portfolio, kind of minimize that stuff as you introduce them. But I want to leave you with some actionable stuff, right? So there's an organization called World of Money that I hope you guys have heard of. Sabrina Lamb, right? So in the summer, they have this Summer Financial Institute. It is intensive from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening. It's an extraordinary program. It's a deep dive participation. They go through all the stuff that we're talking about here. The students pick a company, they lay out their business case, and at the end of the week, they have to present it in front of managing directors at firms like Morgan Stanley and others. This is real deal, serious stuff. It's called World of Money, and it's a Summer Financial Institute that they have, right? So it is extremely reasonable and affordable, right? It's predominantly like, as they say, black and brown kids, right? And our kids don't get to see enough of their peers engage in stuff like that. It's a very powerful, reaffirming thing. Go to their website, register your kids. It's the questionnaire they have to fill out, may be proud. What is LIBOR? I was like, I'm in love. You know what I mean? And the kids left. Our kids got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They come from Connecticut down here. There's people who write next to these things and don't take advantage of it. I told friends from Atlanta, they flew up here, stayed here during the summer. When there are opportunities for you to learn and your kids to learn about personal financial management, that across the board, you have to jump on top of it and take advantage of it. There are some people who are all over it. The vast majority of us are kind of lukewarmish on it, right? That's something that's here, it's in the city, it's great. I could tell you about all kinds of things, but I'm also telling you about something that we do. You should be very keen to ask people, what are they doing? Right. That's very different than what you should necessarily be doing, right? It's powerful, it's impactful. The kids came back home. They loved the fact that they had all of this, all these black teachers, they're professionals from Wall Street who were with them, which they hadn't seen in the communities where we lived. They told us that they were being robbed. We were like, what happened? What do you mean you're being robbed? And they went through the example of what they were getting, the interest rate they were getting from the bank, and what their opportunity cost was, and how we had to change all of this stuff. They know all the stuff about credit. They're asking you what your credit is and what your thoughts are, and they are empowered in just a week. If it takes you 2 years to go get up to speed, you don't gotta wait that time. Look up that program, put your kids in it. I think everybody here is probably in a city somewhere. You got people coming from as far as Atlanta, others coming from Connecticut, and we're bringing families down to it, right? So I would leave that as an action item that you guys can do. World of Money.
I just want to say thank you for the presentation today. As I feel like with all Black History programs, at least from the American perspective, I feel a great program is one that upsets me. Upsets me not because the information is like, but it's because it's almost like it's a conversation that we're having right now. And it's like, you are the experts. You guys have the solutions, or you guys have been doing what you've been doing. So I just took a few notes. Again, the taboo, let's not talk about it, needs to be broken. I agree 100%. Going back to a point you just made, Shawn, where it's the questions of what are you guys doing? The one thing that I picked up on is investment. I know, especially the gentleman that I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Ralph Baker.
Ralph Baker. I know having the investment game, which is funny because I've heard about you. Interesting enough, because I traded the foreign currency market. I have for the last 5 years. So it's funny. I'm sorry, the lady in the front was talking. She's like, yeah, don't invest in Bitcoin. But right now, I'm up $700 in Bitcoin on a Saturday. So again, I'm a firm believer in preach what you practice. Don't practice what you preach. You should be telling people what you're doing. I graduated college. I went to SUNY Oswego. I came back. I graduated from BMCC. I believe college is about the networks, but it's an old, played out story. The majority of people, a lot of people here, at one point or another during this weekend, look down at their phone for over 5-10 minutes. The majority of people, every person on the planet, for the most part, you can Google it, spends over 60 hours on their cell phones. If you think about it, like I just told you, I make this money, I've been doing it full time for 5 years. I make this money on my phone. I make the majority of my money sleeping. As Warren Buffett says, find a way to make money and sleep where you work till you die. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about giving the keys to success, to, you know what I'm saying, that freedom. And I love the conversation, but I feel like it's like there's more. Like there's some answers that y'all not getting, and I'm here for it. Like as an investor, I go, there's more. Like I'm sure I'm not the only one that's feeling this, but there's a question that maybe needs to be asked. I haven't heard it yet, but I'm like, man, there's so much I'm sure that you guys can give up. And I'm like, as an investor, a kid that goes to Spanish school, who shot that Payless till I was in junior high school, who still doesn't want to pay insurance. But I retired my parents 3 years ago. I'm debt free. Again, college graduate, debt free. I live in Spanish Harlem. Like I don't have no children. I'm going to Europe on Wednesday. I live a pretty good life. I do what I want with who I want because I got the time, money, and freedom to do just that. But I'm 33 years old. You guys that have a little bit more years, how do you guys teach myself? How do you teach someone else that's listening to pass on the message that we have or that I have? Because it's very similar to the one that y'all have, and I feel like it's possible that I might be able to inspire more than maybe some others that aren't here.
Well, I would say that, first and foremost, I would say that investing is, again, it's a life skill. Like, my father was a former military guy, and, some of my scariest moments growing up in summertime was looking for that 5/8 wrench or that 7/8 wrench or something. I always ended with an 8 and I couldn't find it. Because I wanted to play basketball. I was into basketball and books, and he made me learn how to work on cars, and they made me how to work on small things about a house so that you wouldn't get taken. Your biggest asset other than your house is probably going to be your 401k plan if you work for a corporation. My first job out of college, I worked at a bank, and they were introducing a 401k plan to banks, more pension plans, and everybody was lost. And so all my staff was looking at me about what to invest in. I would have to go and do all this research. And I couldn't give people advice, but I would tell them, what I thought about the economy, what interest rates are going, so on and so forth. And you have all this data coming at you: aggressive growth fund, blue chip fund, long-term bond fund, short-term bond fund. So again, it's a life skill, and again, your second biggest asset, your biggest asset other than your home is probably going to be your 401k plan. Not that you have to work on Wall Street, but you have to understand something about investing.
The thing is that we can't cover everything here today. I would love to say because we could spend centuries doing this stuff. This is why I have created a financial literacy movement. And so what we do is we sit with individuals, we give them a free financial analysis to sit down, no obligation, because we get scared if someone's going to try to sell you something. So we're going to take that away. And we're presenting it today. When we talk to groups, we go around from all over the city, tri-state, matter of fact, all over the country. I have extended myself to being on Soul City Network, which is filming right now, to have a show called Access Wealth Nation so that I can continue to give this information out, to intrigue us to start to do. So, there's so many different markets that are out here, and I've talked to young people who get involved in the hype for this year, which happens to be part of the foreign exchange, the bitcoins, the cryptocurrency. My thing is that if you do not have a plan, you're going to plan to fail. So we're putting the plan together. What's your goals? What's your dreams? That's the thing I can't do. I can't bring those dreams and goals to you. You have to start to dream again. We as a people stopped. And so, we started going into the job, the journey of the broke. We think of the consciousness of what, I work, and I get nothing for it. I'm just going to, eventually I'll die. We got to build legacies. We talked about the legacy building. That can be done. Inside the book, the How Many Works book, it talks about the fact that, we spend a lot of money even with our children when it comes, before they even are physically getting here, we have a doggone baby shower, and we put all the money into the baby shower. But how about if you put $2,500 away for that child? Put it away. Because they ain't gonna have there's no Social Security anymore for them. So fine, put it away. Do you know if you let that money sit and you let it grow tax deferred, and then you can withdraw it tax free? Yeah, tax free. That child could, at their senior years, have over a $1.3 million to work with. These things can be done. But we've got to get rich quick, satisfy my need right now problem and mentality. So, I would say is that I have my website. It has all sorts of videos on it because I found out that folks can't take long videos, so we got 3-minute videos, Lord knows. When it comes to our money, we don't have a minute to talk, we sit. So we tried to make it as simple as possible. We went on through wealthwave.com. It's on a paper that we'll be distributing here. And to get you to the consciousness of the different things. There is no cookie cutter approach to investing. And though I do disagree that investing in stocks is very risky, it's how you invest in the stocks. It's how you consciously work. And yes, I do know Sabrina Lamb's program. I think it's wonderful. I wish we had more of them across the country. But instead, since we can't have more of them, we have the YouTubes, we have the television, we have things that we can educate our children. But we've got to also, be acting like we know it all. We don't know. And one generation has to sacrifice so that the next generations will flourish. And the only way that's going to be done is that we take this time now. I'm a certified baby boomer. I believe that I have to sacrifice now so that the millennials will stop messing up. Okay, we can stop calling them millennials and start calling them young professionals, because that's what they are. So that's what we need to do. So yes, but there, I know we can't tell it all here. I would love to. We can discuss all types of investment vehicles there. I'd like to sit with every single person. I leave it open. I have some of my associates are here now that we can sit down and create a financial plan for you. And it's up to you if you're going to work it. Okay?
Yeah, in my book, Shock Exchange, for the kids from Brooklyn, particularly Great Recession, in the Panhandle, I put all the information, stuff we did with these kids, from due diligence to how to value stocks, to how to track these stocks, where to look for the information, whether it's public filings, research reports. In the book, I spent 15 years doing corporate finance and M&A. I built models for big corporations, how to do deals. Done deals in the U.S., internationally. $billion deals. I built the models they use to analyze the deals. So it's funny, like I've heard of it, right, so it's in the book, but the key point I keep trying to make is that as far as advancing black society, it's going to come from the people in this room. Okay? It's not going to come from the government. It's not going to come from any politicians. Information is going to empower black folks and come from our kids and for your kids, our kids. It's not going to, you're not going to hear about it on CNBC. Right. It's not. Right. So I can only write about it and put it in a book. I can't go door to door like the Avon lady and tell people about it. You know what I'm saying? If I do, and the other thing you're fighting is, if I do a silly dance, they're gonna beam it to Neptune. If you do go make 50 words around the racial slur, they will beam it to Neptune. Something that's important to black folks, you're not gonna know about it. The mainstream media is not gonna know. That's why a lot of intellectuals like Marcus Garvey and W.B. Du Bois, that's why a lot of them died unhappy. You follow?
Yes, sir.
Information like this, I am probably the most dangerous black man on the planet. You follow? They don't want to give me a platform to talk to the masses. I'll just put it in a book. I can't make people read it. So all the information is there. I've been on radio stations, anybody who will listen, been talking about this for years. Brooklyn, Manhattan, everywhere. We've been at Black Enterprise, everywhere, talking about financial literacy. When nobody cared. In 2006, everybody's like, why do we need financial literacy? 2 years later, the world almost comes to an end. All of a sudden, we need financial literacy. Because when I was talking to these kids in the summertime, the parents looked at me like I was from Neptune. Like, why are you talking about financial literacy? This is too much too advanced for them, and so on and so forth. But I mean, again, I have no choice. My father said, when I get home, you better have something cogent to talk about, or there are going to be some consequences. You follow? So I try to use it, again, basketball as a carrot. But my parents weren't playing around. You follow?
Question I have is to Mr. Shawn Rochester. I haven't read your book yet, but I'm certainly going to. I just wanted to know, out of curiosity, do you factor in, when you were talking about patents earlier and the small percentage of Black Americans who managed to get patents filed? I'm just curious as to how many white-owned patents were derivative of ideas that were essentially stolen from blacks. And do you factor that into how much wealth was potentially extracted from the black community as well? And another question I have before you answer that one is, this is to the panel on a whole. Whenever we hear about like a black business or one that we think is a black business, we later find out that either they don't own it or they wind up selling it. Like Oprah doesn't really own, and Ice-T doesn't really own the Big Three League. So I'm just curious, what is this trend of this perception that it's a black-owned business when it's not, and if it is black-owned and it's profitable, somehow it winds up in white hands anyway. So first question about the patent, about the black business.
So in terms of the patents, it's not factored in. I like to speak to things that I can tie to data and not to what I think is happening. There is no doubt and there is no question that black ideas were taken and were stolen, repackaged, and filed. What I need to be able to value that is one of our brilliant researchers to be doing the work to help us understand the size of that, right? Once I have an idea what the size is, then I can do work to calculate the financial cost of that. But so there's no doubt that it should be far more than 726. I just don't know what that number is. And everything that I speak about is tied to research. It is not a qualitative discussion. It's not my feelings on the matter. It's a very tight and solid, comprehensive, well laid out kind of argument. There's one thing I wanted to double back to before the second question that you put in, which is that people are along a line of a continuum, and we gotta stop talking about two issues that are different. Investing requires that you have had an accumulation of something to invest. I know a lot of people that make great incomes, they are economic pass-throughs. They don't have any resources. They don't have anything to invest in all these kind of different things that we're talking about. And some folks need advice and counsel and on just how to get positive cash flow. I also know a lot of people who have negative cash flow, and they are borrowing from their credit cards, they're borrowing from their friends and family, and they're doing this kind of round trips to be able to kind of hold things together, and they are prime targets for predatory lending. Now, when it's talking about that, all high income does is allow you to manage and absorb stupid or uninformed decisions better than somebody who has a lower income. It does not mean that you are better informed or prepared or ready for it. At best, you can buy better advice and counsel. So there's a huge continuum of where people are, and we gotta think about that continuum, that not all solutions are for all people. The second thing I just wanted to mention, which is really critical, which is this PhD framework that we haven't spoken about. People's titles and the money that they have and the wealth is terrific, and I honor you for that, for whoever that achievement is. Largely doesn't matter to me. Because are you deploying those resources in ways that create jobs and create or expand business or provide liquidity in the Black community? And a vast majority of the time, it's absolutely not. You followed all the advice, you've accumulated $15 million worth of stuff, you go buy your brand new house, it's $3 million, you don't use a Black realtor. You need insurance for that unless you self-finance and you decide you want to risk it all on chance, and you don't use a Black agent or a broker. You decide that you don't like how the kitchen is laid out and the baths, and you want to redo the home to get it to your dream state, and you don't even think about a Black contractor. You decide that you're interested in putting in solar panels or whatever it is. You have the very businesses that we're talking about. Who does your taxes? Who does the back office? Who are you employing? And as a business, who are you doing business with? Most Black businesses don't do businesses with other Black businesses. That's why this PhD framework is so important. It's what gets the circulation that we're always talking about. We talk about the fact that other communities, it circulates for 21 days or 7 days or 3 days. Nobody ever tells you how they calculate that, by the way. But when it comes to Black people, it's only a couple of minutes. Why is that? It's because they deployed a PhD framework. They purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs and businesses and provide capital in their community. It's not new. I just gave it a name for us. The issue is that we need to practice it. When you practice PhD, you take us with you. And the fact of the matter is the vast majority of people do not. Quick other point. Remember several years ago, you had a lot of solidarity after a number of police shootings, and people were marching up and down Fifth Avenue, arm in arm. I believe it was several thousand people, 20, 30,000 people. It was a beautiful, amazing, and wonderful thing. You know what people saw? They saw solidarity. You know what I saw? $3 to $4 billion walking up that street, and not a nickel of that was going to be spent on a Black business, because we're not thinking about this PhD economic framework. It's the framework, it's the basis by which you see the efficacy or the impact of whatever it is. Don't get involved in who you like and who you don't like. Is it creating a job, business, or providing capital in a Black community? That's it. If you're doing that, let's do more of it. If you're not doing it, you need to get a plan to do it. But we cannot continue to sow and to seed into that, whether it's us or our allies, the government, the institutions that we're part of. That's a huge critical factor of getting out of this situation. Politics, the churches, businesses, universities, there's no, all the people who say they're allied with us, that have businesses that are doing $5, $6 billion a year with $3 billion supply chains and don't do 1 ounce of business with a Black business. They could create 15,000 jobs. You gotta let them know that this is important to us, because there's some people for whom they will do it if they know that. So I just wanted to make that point, and then you guys can kind of talk about the second question, which was Black businesses selling.
Yeah, I think African Americans too focus on shiny stuff, like what Ice-T, right? Ice Cube's doing, Oprah's doing. I mean, we spend too much time talking about entertainment and what they're doing, and too much time talking about some professional athlete or. I think we spend. I couldn't care less with Oprah or Ice Cube or what some basketball players doing. Then we spend too much time, talking about rappers and shiny objects and shiny stuff. I'm more like in the soul of what working class people are doing, what people.
But the focus of the question wasn't about celebrity. It was about the fact that oftentimes a Black face is used as a front for what we think is a Black-owned business, and then when we do research, we realize.
Right, Black. You mean give me a.
I don't care about celebrity.
Okay. I don't know too much about like Black storefronts, but in terms of like in the Black community, these people in this is people who go to your church on a regular basis, people who you know personally own a Black business. A Black storefront or what some big name or whatever what they're doing, whether it's Black owned or not, I I think we spend too much time, with these big names and big shiny objects, and not enough time with these people who are here now. These type of people.
I understand what you're saying, is that they advertise and promote so that we will go, because when we get a consciousness, we want to buy black. There was a time, there was the little black book, I think it was called the Black Book, where there were black businesses. Green Book. Green Book was, yeah. When I was growing up, it was the Black Book. But I know historically there was the Green Book where you couldn't even go, where we could, go to the different hotels and things that existed on the route. That's the historical side. The sad part, yes, we have to ask, we have to look to see, the thing is, I tell folks I wore raggedy nails for the longest because I refused to go to a shop that was not putting money into my community until I could find a black nail salon with someone who also lived in the village of Harlem. To give a little plug, that's Nail Salons by Lisa. But the thing is that, we thought that originally Carver Bank, it's named after Carver. It should be a black one. No, it's owned by Citibank. Look at the doggone, look at the board of directors, but we don't know, we know to look, we do have to be a bit more conscious, and also we have to hold the businesses that we deal with, hold them accountable. When I walk into your black-owned business, you smile. Right. You serve me. You appreciate my dollar. But then again, on the other side, as a customer, you don't come in there looking for the deal, because it's black-owned. You come in there and you're there to make it work. Okay, so, there are things, I understand, they'll put us, like in all the chicken places in Harlem, you see all of them, the guy black is serving me, but he's not the owner. The laundromat, he's not the owner. The parking lot, no. But the thing is, we can become owners. There's, as a matter of fact, one of my clients is working now to open up a laundromat here in Harlem. And the beauty in it is that these two young ladies, they're identical twins, and they want to open up a laundromat so that it serves our community with a pleasure when you come in. And you might be able to get a little glass of wine or something. So these are the things that, we have to take ownership on both sides. We have to be the owners, and we have to be a good consumer if we're going to consume from us and work with us. And yes, you do need to find, I went to, just a side note, I went to the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce one year to one of their economic conferences, and the guy walked in a little late and sat at the table where I was, and he says, "Whew, I'm just getting back. I got a good settlement. I had my lawyer, my Jewish lawyer, had to let me know it was a Jewish lawyer, And then he says, I got a Jewish accountant, and I got to find someone to do my financial planning for me, to put the money away." And I'm sitting there like, I'm in the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce Economic Summit, and this dude just fired two of my businesses. Yes, sir. Okay, and I said it to her. I said, "Brother, you just fired me." And I said, "Now you're talking about as being a financial advisor. I'm one of your best." I said, "Will you hire me?" I have folks who walk into my office of color, who sit down with myself and some of my associates, because my brokerage office is predominantly people of color, predominantly male too. And the thing is that they will look at us, we will put the plan together, and then they will go to Fidelity or to New York Life. Side note, New York Life funded our slavery.
That's right. Yes,
okay?
Yes,
but know your history, and then you're giving them your money, but you won't come to us. You won't trust us, and why don't you trust us? Because you've been brainwashed to believe that we don't know how to deal with money.
Yes.
We do. I have spent all these years, I worked on Wall Street and had to deal with the belly of the beast to no end. But I learned how to trade. I know how to trade options. I know how to invest money. I know how to build portfolios. I teach my associates. I tell them they're the greatest associates in this industry because they know more than any other broker out here probably, you know? But the thing is that will you come? Will you work with us? The attorneys that I connect to in partnership are all attorneys of color because I believe in them and I tell them don't mess up, okay? Don't mess up. We ain't got time for mess up. So that's what we have to do. I agree, Brother Shawn. We've got to build our own infrastructure system. You know, we need to support. We don't know, you know, Soul City is sitting here. It's one of 8, I think I'm wrong now, 8 networks that are out here struggling. Y'all know what Byron Allen is going through right now. You know, we don't even read when those things come up to come out and support. You know that could destroy our entire civil rights movement. You know, we gotta get busy. We can't sit back anymore.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, as far as like Ice Cube or Oprah's concerned, those big entertainers, anytime the mainstream media, this is me, because I'm a country boy from the state of Virginia with my parents ended slavery in the state of Virginia. That's all. But when I hear these big shiny objects on the mainstream media, I rule it out of hand. I don't even pay attention to it. I assume it's white on to begin with, or some type of okey-doke when the mainstream media keep bombarding you with stuff. The other thing is that, and this is just, I don't think it's going to be solved in this room, but when we start talking about this black ecosystem, you're not going to get a lot of masses doing it. Even like, you know, when you start something, a lot of times black people will look at it like, can I get the hookup? I mean, I know a guy making $405,000 a year, $500,000 a year, asking for a free book. Wow. Ask me to give it to him. Mm-hmm. Ask me for it. Or they want a discount, or you have Black Twitter blowing up the day my book came out. Black Twitter blowing up, telling me, I can do what he's doing. I can do that too. They wouldn't buy or copying what you're doing. Send the book to black folks in the media, and one black guy been plagiarizing, I'm just trying to plagiarizing since it came out. Jesus. Been plagiarizing. A random college dropout with no rigorous training in anything, cribbing my writing style, and paraphrasing information from my book. And he's one of the top authors in the country, according to when he takes my publishing and takes it to his white paymasters at some big white publishing house, all of a sudden it's being to Neptune. Been plagiarizing for years. I'm about to drop an anvil on this boy. Make no mistake about it. Where I'm from, you put your hand on something on you, my grandmother make you go get your own switch. All you will hear from them, and by April, May, you will hear whip up, crackle. But also, that's not, I don't know if we can solve that issue in a day, but I guess it's a vestige from slavery where I can do what he's doing. I can compete with him, or I can rob that black guy, or I can take that and take it to my way paymasters. But it's something that Dr. Carl Anderson, I don't know if you heard of him, called, that was called meritorious manumission. There was a law passed in the state of Virginia. So where it would reward slaves for undermining other slaves, right, or inventing something that white people make money from. And Dr. Carl Anderson said he actually reviewed 200 slave uprisings, plantation uprisings over a couple hundred years. In every scenario, another black person snitched. But that's other problems starting black business. Other blacks want to compete with you or don't want, or want to hook up and want the discount.
I hear about the world of money. I'm interested in whether or not there is an adult world of money or adult free classes for the financial training. My son right now graduated from UP, being a single mom, had no money, don't know how he did it, he did it. He's working on some business pieces, got resumes out, all kinds of things, looking for money, but he's really more about having his own business. He's using SCORE as a mentorship program, but would be open to others. What we don't have is a wealth of information of where to go for adult versions of free mentorship in the same way that children have new opportunities now with World of Money or the program that you started. And it concerns me that for those that can't start from the high realms, as Shawn mentioned, that we don't have a lot of free avenues to go and get started. I like the quote that you have from A.G. Gaston, Shawn, we cannot fight and beg from those we fight with at the same time, and that brought to mind for me trademarking that you also mentioned, whereas our current president, every time you use his name on any literature, on any book or anything, you are paying him for his name to be printed. It was my understanding when I first learned Black Lives Matter, it was actually trademarked by him. And then now it's been traded off to a subsidiary, so his name is now tagged. But when it first happened, I checked the trademark website, and it had his name, and he did own Black Lives Matter, the words themselves. So, can you help us understand, like you said, the face of blacks and not really being owned? We got the words Black Lives Matter not being really owned. He even trademarked the word Central Park. So, where do we go?
Maybe I'm not being clear because I'm hearing your sister, but that's what my group is. We are Financial Literacy 101. We give seminars. I have my website that's for video education. If your son really is serious about putting together his business plan, I have an infrastructure system that we can put him through so that he can have his business plan, because he needs a business plan with the financials. We have great ideas, but we don't put the financials to them. But that's why I'm out here. I'm out here, and that's why I'm not just out here. It's not just me. I have a team of folks who are, and not only that, but I am mentoring young folks to do the same, because I don't know how long God's going to let me stay here. So while that, I got to impart all that stuff that I've gotten from being with these folks to be able to share it so that they know the next ones. And I've seen it in these associates that I have. They're able to, they make me proud when they stand up and do a presentation in a seminar, to educate. The problem is that once we give the information, what are you going to do? Do you do anything? We have a mechanism by which people can follow up. We follow up with them, and then you become MIA. We can't get you to pick up the phone, and we don't want to hunt you down, but we can help. But again, my last words to really on this message is that if you learned something today or heard something or connected somewhere, you got to share it. Each one has to teach one. Each one reach one.
Okay.
As far as the trademarks is concerned, before you come up with any idea, you gotta get a copyrighted trademark. Before I came up with my name for my team, I had it copyrighted. Before the trademark went through, I never put the website up. Before the trademark went through, and the trademark went through, I put the website up. About 9 months later, I just checked it, and another name came up called New York Stock Exchange. It was like a roller skating team called the New York Stock Exchange. They had copied it that quickly, but it wasn't copyright infringement because they were using it slightly differently, but they had already stolen it. They'd already stolen it. But if somebody likes your idea, they will steal it.
Well, we have to wrap up, but one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. We're going to listen to that one last question.
Thank you. My last question is, now that we've come to this point, what are the solutions? From all three of you, what are the top 2 social structures that you think we should develop or we need to develop in our community?
My first thing is I think you should get your own house in order and that you start to be more aware financially, get yourself, we will have some step ones. My team has some that you can sign up for. You can get the book. I say read the book. The reason why is because it takes about an hour to read the book. And so therefore you'll get some financial concepts and then sit down with a financial advisor to build your financial portfolio. While you're doing it, share it with your children, share it with your neighbors, let them know that there's organizations out here that are here to help us. But we can't do this by ourselves. We can be here, we can give you the information, but it's all the action has to come from you. So if that's what you want, what your desires are, you've got to bring your dreams. So you got to do some dreaming. But also, you've got to have some trust. You've got to trust that we're here to help you.
Again, as far as financial literacy is concerned, if you have kids, start them out while they're young. Same thing you would do if they were learning how to swim. And as far as adults, there's information out there. We can't just take it door to door and just give it to you. And the mainstream media is not going to tell you about it. Other thing is, which is easier said than done. Again, this black ecosystem. We must be the change that we have to see, and we all. I mean, buying black is all I knew because I thought the country was black growing up. I didn't know anything else. But you have to be the change that you want to see. If we're not doing business with each other and spending money in the black community, we're done as a community. We're done. And so we have nobody to blame but ourselves. And you can't keep talking about, you can't keep, while we're, starting money, the Federal Reserve is going to start printing money and giving it to somebody who doesn't look like us. And so I think we beat up ourselves too much because after the financial crisis, the government printed money and gave it to people, tens of trillions of dollars to people who did not look like us. And they had the lights bright when you come on in New York City. That's how bad these banks were underwater. So you have these billionaires running around with money the government gave to them. And they're prancing around and talking about who they are and what they've accomplished. And what's trickling down is it's not trickling down to our community. What's trickling down is higher rent, higher costs for housing, higher costs for college, higher costs for healthcare. That's what's trickling down. So I think we beat ourselves up too much because we're not going to get any help from the government. Only allies we have are people in this room. So we must be the change we want to see. I was talking about this in college, so if talking about it was going to solve something, it was solved already. But it's got to start small with people like people here in this room.
I would counsel us all that this is really just the first of many conversations that need to be had. One of the things that I notice again and again and again is that people want to solve problems that were developed over a 500-year period, 400 years in this place we call America, in 2 minutes. And they want a silver bullet. And the answer is there's no silver bullet. There's a compendium of things that need to be done in parallel and in series. To the extent that we can educate ourselves about how to manage our resources, we should do so. There's free resources online. You can learn anything online. You can learn to build a rocket. You can learn anything. Go there and devour that information. That's free resources. There are paid resources that our peers have no problem paying for because they know there's tremendous value, right, when it comes to there. The other thing that we need to understand is we need to understand the environment in which we are operating. You have to understand yourself, strengths and weakness and whatnot. You have to understand your opponent's strengths and weakness and whatnot. But then you have to understand the field and the ground over which this battle is taking place. And unless you have a very good sense of it, you're going to wind up in the same situation. We ought to be committed to dedicating the time to really understanding where we want to go, the context that we're in, why it's been so difficult for us to get out of it, so we can design solutions that can be much more impactful. When I started writing this book, I took it from the perspective that we've been having this conversation for 150 years. I'm not some new guy who's just thinking about it. We've been talking about it. The issue is, despite all of that, we have 2%. All the wonderful things you can describe that people want to tell us how great it is, it's inside that 2%. Why is it not 13%? And what do we need to do to get from here to there? That's individually and that's collectively. And there's a lot that we can do as individuals. We're not even close to using our full abilities. There is a lot that we can do as institutions. Almost all of our institutions are financially weak. And most of them spend no time on economic advancement, personal financial management or financial literacy, or business creation development or economics. Economics has got to be the core, the center. It is not an appendage. Almost all these socioeconomic problems are dealing because we got a gap of jobs, businesses, and capital. And we got to look at things from that lens and that perspective and be committed to the long term. There are folks who have been working on plans for 50, 60 years that they are seeing come into fruition today. We have to have that same level of commitment when it comes to us.
Oh, thank you all. Really,
Oh, PhD stands for purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs, create and expand businesses, and provide capital in the Black community. That any and everyone can and should do that. It's not just for Black people, but the impact is for the Black community.
Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.